The heavy oak doors of Charleston Superior Court creaked open, spilling a shaft of pale morning light onto the polished marble floor. A hush rippled through the packed courtroom as every head turned toward the entrance. There she was, 6-year-old Lila Monroe, her small hand wrapped tightly around the leash of a sleek black Labrador whose every step radiated quiet vigilance. Dressed in a pale blue sundress and sneakers that scuffed the tile with each hesitant step, Lila looked impossibly fragile beneath the high, vaulted ceilings and rows of towering legal minds. But it wasn't just her presence that drew the collective breath from the room. It was the silence that clung to her like a second skin. She hadn't spoken in weeks, not to her parents, not to the therapists, not even to the prosecutors who had staked an entire case on the hope that she might do so today. Judge Elijah Rhodes, silver-haired and sharp-eyed beneath his dark robe, leaned forward slightly, his gavel idle beside a stack of briefs. He'd presided over high-profile trials before, but something about the weight in the air today unsettled him. The defendant, Peter Langston, sat calmly at the defense table, his jaw clenched, his expression unreadable. A youth counselor with decades of public trust behind him, Langston looked like the sort of man no one wanted to suspect. But this morning, suspicion hung over him like a storm cloud. Lila stepped past rows of curious eyes and whispered camera clicks, her grip on the leash tightening as Shadow, the Labrador, guided her gently forward. The moment she reached the witness stand, she paused. The room held its breath. Her green eyes, wide, haunted, drifted across the courtroom and landed on Langston. Shadow's head lifted, his nostrils flared, his ears twitched. And then, without warning, a low growl curled from deep in his chest, vibrating through the stillness like distant thunder. A tremor of unease passed through the gallery. Judge Rhodes's eyes narrowed. Something had shifted. The trial hadn't even begun, and already the air had changed. The sun beat down on the quiet suburb of Lake Harrow, casting long golden streaks across manicured lawns and white picket fences that felt too perfect to hold any danger. In the backyard of a modest brick house, laughter once echoed like birdsong, but not today. The yard was silent now, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the oak leaves. From the kitchen window, Daniel Monroe stared out, his coffee cooling in his hand, eyes fixed on the empty swing swaying gently in the breeze. His 6-year-old daughter Lila hadn't spoken in 26 days, not since the afternoon her 9-year-old cousin, Noah, vanished without a trace. One moment he was there, tossing a rubber ball in the backyard, his voice rising with childhood delight. The next, he was gone. The gate had been open, a gray pickup truck seen idling too long near the curb. And just like that, silence took over, outside and within Lila. She'd seen something that day, something she couldn't or wouldn't say. Not to Daniel, not to her mother, not to the investigators who turned their home upside down searching for any clue. All she did now was draw, page after page of childlike sketches, Noah, a shadowy truck, and lately the same figure over and over, a man with no face, standing beneath a crooked cross. Detective Aaron Calhoun, sharp-eyed and bone-weary from years on the child crimes unit, had visited 3 times, each one ending in the same still silence from Lila. But it was Calhoun who pushed for the therapy dog, convinced that sometimes trust wore 4 legs. That's when Shadow entered their world. The black Labrador with eyes like polished obsidian had been a search and rescue legend before a collapsed tunnel nearly ended his career. Now retired, Shadow had been retrained to work with trauma victims, and within days of arriving, something shifted. Lila started sleeping beside him, touching his scar, tracing his spine as if trying to remember what safety felt like. The drawings changed too, less frantic, more detailed. And for the first time, she began to mimic a training signal, a tap of 2 fingers against her leg. "It's how she'll tell us when she remembers," Calhoun said. "It's her voice, for now." The family clung to that hope like a lifeline. Then the call came. The DA was moving forward. The suspect, Peter Langston, had been identified in a grainy camera still a few blocks from the scene, wearing a shirt Noah had described weeks before. A well-loved local youth counselor, Langston was the last man anyone expected. But trauma doesn't care about reputations. When they told Lila she'd have to appear in court, She didn't cry. She didn't run. She simply stood, walked a shadow, and placed her hand on his back. In that moment, Daniel knew. She wouldn't speak, but she wouldn't run either. Whatever she saw that day was still inside her, and with Shadow by her side, she was ready to face it. The courtroom buzzed with a low current of tension as opening statements concluded and the first real day of testimony began. Judge Elijah Rhodes adjusted his glasses, glancing down at the docket, but his sharp gaze flicked often to the little girl seated quietly near the front. Lila Monroe sat beside her mother, legs swinging just above the floor, her tiny hands still curled around Shadow's leash. The black Labrador sat rigid, unmoving, his eyes trained like a sniper's on the defense table. Across the aisle, Peter Langston leaned back in his chair with unsettling calm, his tailored suit pristine, his face unreadable. Once hailed as a pillar of the community, a coach, a youth mentor, the smiling face in dozens of school yearbooks. Langston had built a life of trust. That trust now cracked with every word the prosecution uttered. But cracks weren't convictions. The evidence was circumstantial. A witness saw a truck matching Langston's model. A surveillance camera showed someone with his build near the scene. And then there was Lila, the only one who may have truly seen him. But she hadn't spoken. Not a word. Not even when shown Langston's photo. Not when asked, begged, pleaded with. She'd only drawn. And even that was open to interpretation. As the court debated the admissibility of Shadow's presence, Langston's attorney, Everett Shaw, stood with the slow, confident movement of a man who'd rehearsed every gesture. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "while we appreciate the sensitivity of the child's condition, the presence of a large, emotionally suggestive animal in front of the jury prejudices this entire proceeding. The defense requests that the animal be removed during testimony." Gasps fluttered through the gallery. Lila's grip tightened around the leash. Shadow shifted, barely, but it was enough. Judge Rhodes stared at the dog, then at the child, then back at Shaw. "Motion denied," he said quietly. "The court has reviewed the psychological documentation. The animal stays." A ripple of tension snapped through the defense table. Langston's jaw ticked once, then reset. But behind his composed facade, his fingers tapped restlessly against the underside of the table, each beat sharper than the last. Something wasn't going according to plan. Then came the first witness, Martha Tillman, the neighbor who claimed to see someone matching Langston's description near the Monroe home. Her testimony was shaky, her voice wavered, her certainty flickered, but her words painted a vivid picture. He knelt beside the boy. He said something about needing help. Then the truck door opened. She paused, swallowing hard. "That's when I yelled." Langston showed no reaction, but Lila turned, just slightly. Her head tilted as if the words triggered something. Her eyes flicked to Langston. And for the first time that day, her fingers made the signal. 2 taps on her leg. Shadow's ears pricked. His head rose. A low, controlled growl vibrated beneath the courtroom's strained silence. Judge Rhodes's brow furrowed. A shiver passed through the room like wind across water. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. Something had just shifted, and it wasn't in Langston's favor. The air in the courtroom had changed. What had started as structured proceedings now simmered with unease, like a storm building just beneath the surface. Judge Rhodes noticed it first, not in the arguments or evidence, but in the silences between them. They stretched longer, more uncertain. Lila hadn't spoken, but her signal had been clear. Shadow's growl had unsettled everyone, including the man seated calmly at the defense table. Peter Langston hadn't moved a muscle, but his stillness now felt calculated. Rhodes watched him with narrowed eyes, noting the subtle tension in his jaw, the faint tremor in his hand when he reached for a glass of water that went untouched. Something was slipping, just barely. In the back hallway, prosecutor Maya Delaney paced, her thoughts spinning. She replayed Lila's gesture over and over, 2 fingers to the leg. Shadow's response hadn't been a generic sign of support. It was recognition. But recognition of what? Of danger, of scent, of guilt. She called in Shadow's handler, a quiet man named Keller, who'd worked the dog in dozens of disaster zones and missing persons cases. That growl wasn't trained, Keller said, eyes dark. That was personal. He knows something. Meanwhile, Langston sat in a private conference room with his lawyer, Everett Shaw, the mask of composure slowly cracking. She tapped again, Langston muttered, eyes darting. Just like she did outside the house that day. He trailed off. Shaw froze. What did you say? Langston waved him off, covering the slip with a cough. But it was too late. Shaw had caught it. Back in the courtroom, Lila sat curled beside Shadow, drawing quietly on a notepad. Her mother glanced down and froze. The sketch wasn't new. Lila had drawn similar scenes before, but this one had detail. A pickup truck, a crooked cross drawn on the side, and standing beside it, the same faceless man, only now. He had eyes, piercing, narrow. Langston's eyes. Delaney approached the bench. Your Honor, we request to introduce additional drawings as demonstrative evidence, along with contextual testimony from Dr. Elaine Wu, child psychologist. Judge Rhodes hesitated, then nodded. Proceed. As Dr. Wu explained Lila's progress, her trauma, her patterns, and how she used drawing to express memories, a low murmur built in the gallery. Each sketch shown under the projector added detail. A house, a license plate, partial but real, a scar on the man's hand. Slowly, a story emerged without a single word spoken. Langston shifted for the first time, tugging at his collar. Sweat glistened at his temple. And in that moment, Judge Rhodes saw it. Not guilt, but fear. The power in the room had shifted. It no longer belonged to the polished lawyers or the seasoned judge. It belonged to a silent child and her dog. Piece by piece, memory by memory, they were building something far stronger than testimony, a truth no one could ignore. The gallery was silent, so silent it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Judge Rhodes sat motionless on the bench, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes locked on the trembling screen as the courtroom lights dimmed. One by one, Lila's drawings appeared under the projector. Each image bled color and innocence. Crayon strokes too precise for a child simply imagining. A gray truck with 3 stars on the side. A cross tilted over a hill. A man with sharp, heavy shoulders and a scar carved down his left wrist. It wasn't a testimony in words. It was a confession in color. In her seat, Lila stared forward, unmoving, her hand gently resting on Shadow's head. The black Labrador remained stone still, his breathing shallow, as if waiting for something he already knew was coming. Then came the twist. Dr. Wu, still on the stand, cleared her throat and gently held up the latest drawing. This one was completed 3 days ago, she said, after a session where Lila smelled a cologne sample provided by the court. She clicked to the next slide. A faceless man again, but this time, the detail had sharpened. A birthmark on the neck, a ring on the right pinky finger, and a bracelet, a simple woven band. Langston's hand twitched. That same bracelet had been visible in a photo from his youth camp website, but he hadn't worn it to court. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Judge Rhodes leaned forward, the tension between his shoulders rigid. Maya Delaney stood. Your Honor, at this time we request to recall Shadow with his handler and test a live scent trigger. Shaw shot up. Objection! This is unscientific theatrics. Rhodes raised a hand. I'll allow it. A court officer opened the door. Keller entered with Shadow. The dog immediately perked up. No command, no coaxing, just instinct. He scanned the room, then stopped. Dead on Langston. A low growl rumbled from his chest, louder this time, more primal. His muscles tensed, tail stiff, ears locked forward. Langston flinched, not subtly, not discreetly. He pulled back, like someone had struck him. All eyes snapped to him. Judge Rhodes stood. Mr. Langston, have you had any prior interaction with this animal? Langston's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Sweat beaded along his brow. His lips moved again, forming a wordless shape. Mr. Langston? Rhodes's voice was sharper now. Langston glanced at his lawyer, at the jury, at Lila, who still hadn't blinked. Then he looked at Shadow. The dog had taken a step forward. Langston's voice cracked. Get that thing away from me! Gasps erupted. A reporter dropped his pen. Delaney didn't flinch. Your Honor, the dog recognizes the defendant, and our evidence just linked Langston's family cabin to the missing boy's last known location. The soil sample matches the tread found on his truck. We're requesting a 24-hour recess to verify the property. Rhodes nodded, slow and deliberate. Motion granted. Court will reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Langston sank into his seat, pale, cornered. And Lila? She finally moved. Just one motion. Her hand reached over and closed into Shadow's fur. A storm was coming, and everyone in that courtroom knew there was no shelter from the truth now. Morning light spilled across the marble floor of the Charleston courthouse like gold over steel, beautiful but cold. The seats in the gallery were once again filled, but this time the crowd was quieter, warier. The circus of spectacle had passed. What remained was the ache of consequences and the slow, grinding machinery of justice catching up with a man who had once seemed untouchable. Peter Langston sat hunched at the defense table, shoulders no longer square but sagging, like the weight of his own lies had finally begun to crush him. His hands, once steady, now trembled. The bracelet he once wore proudly, woven by kids at his summer camp, lay in an evidence bag, tagged and sealed. He didn't speak when court resumed. He didn't need to. The evidence had spoken for him. The bracelet, the soil, the tire treads. And then the discovery. A remote cabin in the woods near Ridgefield, found during the recess, just as Delaney had predicted. Inside, the tattered remains of Noah Monroe's backpack, scraps of food, a sleeping bag, and Noah himself, cold, terrified, but alive. That morning, Langston's lawyer leaned in, whispering, "They've got you." All of it. Langston didn't deny it. His voice, gravel rough and hollow, barely left his throat. "I didn't think she'd remember," he said. "She was just a kid." "No," Shaw replied grimly. "She's the kid who stopped you." When court reconvened, the shift in power was palpable. Delaney no longer fought to prove. Now she controlled the tempo, her voice calm, precise and heavy with quiet triumph. She recounted the cabin findings, showed photos of Noah safe in the hospital, and played audio from the rescue team. But the room turned still again when Judge Rhodes addressed Langston. "You've stolen years of peace from families who trusted you," he said, voice level but edged in fire. "What do you have to say for yourself before sentencing?" Langston stood barely. He turned, not to the judge, not to the prosecutors, but to the gallery. His eyes found Lila. She sat close to her mother, Shadow resting at her feet like a living monument. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, voice cracking, "but I want her to know she was braver than I ever expected, and I was more of a coward than I let anyone see." Lila didn't move. She didn't cry. She simply kept her hand on Shadow, the same quiet touch that had brought her through every storm. Outside, the news exploded. A predator unmasked. A boy returned. A child's silence broken not with words but with courage. Reporters swarmed. Parents hugged their children closer. But inside Lila's world, things moved slower. She was safe now, yes, but healing wasn't immediate. At home, she still flinched at creaking doors, still checked that Shadow was nearby before closing her eyes. But something had changed. One night she climbed into bed, pulled the covers to her chin, and whispered into Shadow's fur, "He's gone now." Her father heard from the hallway. He didn't enter. He just leaned against the doorframe, tears silently slipping down his face. In the courtroom, Langston received his sentence. Life without parole. There were no cheers, just silence, and the knowledge that justice had come, but not without scars. And Lila? She didn't smile, but she stood when court adjourned, her hands still resting on the leash, her back a little straighter. Because redemption doesn't always belong to those who fall. Sometimes it belongs to those who stand back up and help others do the same. The video clip hit the internet like a lightning bolt. No narration, no music, just raw courtroom footage. A 6-year-old girl in a pale blue dress stands beside a black Labrador, her hands steady on his fur, her green eyes fixed on the man who once haunted her dreams. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. She lifts her hand and taps her leg. Once, twice. Shadow's reaction is immediate. A growl, low and primal, shakes the silence. The camera captures everything. The jury shifting uncomfortably, the judge leaning forward, and Peter Langston, the once trusted youth counselor, visibly recoiling, his mask slipping. That single moment spread across every platform, shared by millions who didn't need context to understand the gravity of what they'd witnessed. It became more than just evidence. It became a symbol. News anchors called it the testimony without words. Psychologists analyzed Lila's bravery. Survivors of trauma reposted the clip with captions like, "This is why we believe children." But behind the views and hashtags was something quieter, deeper, a sense that justice, however slow, had found its way into a little girl's world. Weeks later, the courtroom was empty. The media had moved on, the headlines faded. But for Lila, the aftermath still lingered. Healing wasn't a destination, it was a quiet road, walked one step at a time. Some nights were harder than others, but there were fewer nightmares, fewer drawings filled with shadowy figures. And one night, as a soft spring rain tapped against the window, Lila looked up at her father and asked if Noah could come over to play. It was the first time she'd said her cousin's name aloud since the day he vanished. Daniel didn't answer right away. His voice caught, but he smiled through it and nodded. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think he'd like that." Meanwhile, Shadow remained by her side, silent, loyal, watchful. No longer just a therapy dog, but a piece of her armor. Proof that sometimes when words fail, love still finds a way to speak. Judge Rhodes, reflecting on the trial, later told a reporter, "That little girl changed the way I view the courtroom. She reminded me that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and you'd better be quiet enough to hear it." Peter Langston would never walk free again. But the story wasn't about him anymore. It was about Lila, about resilience, about how even in the darkest moments, courage can rise, unexpected, quiet, and unstoppable. And maybe that's what the world needs to remember. Justice doesn't always wear a badge or robe. Sometimes it wears a leash. So if you love this wild ride in the Charleston courtroom, where a little girl's silence shattered a predator's defense and a loyal dog sparked a national reckoning, then buckle up because there's so much more to come. Hit that subscribe button for the X Daily Stories channel, your front row seat to gripping tales that twist, turn, and leave you thinking. We're dropping fresh, cinematic stories every week, drama, suspense, and life lessons that stick with you long after the credits roll. Don't miss out. Join our crew, turn on notifications, and dive into the next epic adventure. Great stories are waiting. Let's explore them together.